A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Directors Club lunchtime webinar. Today, our webinar is entitled Customer Service is the New Brand Hero, and today's event is generously supported by Verint. Now, my name is John Snow, and I will be chairing today's Directors Club webinar. I shall be moderating, introducing our speakers, and hosting our Q&A session, which is at the end of the formal presentation. Today, I'm joined by two experts from Verint, our webinar supporters. Claire Richardson, who is the Vice President of Workforce Optimization Solutions, and Steve Rosier, who's the Director of Analytics. But more about our presenters in just a few moments. Throughout today's webinar, ladies and gentlemen, you can participate by asking questions at any time during the presentations or during the Q&A session itself. You don't have to wait until the end of the event to ask questions. You can post them using the Q&A icon, which is on the floating toolbar, which I think will be on the right-hand side of your screen, although you can move it around if you so wish. Now, you click on the question mark icon, and that will open your Q&A window. And within that window, in the small area at the bottom, you can put your question up to 256 characters and then press the send. You can also choose who that goes to, whether it goes to all panelists or a particular panelist, or if it can be seen by everybody. So send your question through, however many you like, and at whatever point in the program. That's absolutely fine. And they can be simple or they can be quite complex. If we don't manage to address all of your questions during the Q&A session today, then we will obviously do our best to get a direct answer to you post the event from the most appropriate speaker. Now, if you wish to tweet about the webinar today, you can do using the hashtag DCGBNI, and at the end of the presentation, I'll also tell you a little bit about our Directors Club webinar, our Directors Club Twitter feed. That's something that we're going to recommend that you follow, but a little bit more about that later. Now, moving straight on, and I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. They are both from Verint and both experts within their field. First up, when I hand over, will be Claire Richardson, and Claire is Vice President of Workforce Optimization Solutions with 15 years of contact center and back office operations experience, providing business consultancy advice within the sales cycle on workforce management opportunities in contact centers and back office operations. Now, she will be sharing the stage today with Steve Rosier, who's the Director of Analytics, specializing in voice of the customer analytics, customer feedback, and has over 20 years experience in successful project implementation, consultancy, and operational management in multi-site contact center environments. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to hand over I'm going to change the slide deck, and I'm going to hand over the presenters' controls over to Claire and introduce Claire Richardson. Claire, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, John. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. From a Verint perspective, we're going to talk you through some consumer research that we've recently undertaken and looking at, is service the new marketing? So we've got a couple of areas that we're going to cover during the session with an agenda as follows: looking at whether services the new marketing, getting a greater understanding around customer satisfaction within some various verticals, which I'll talk you through shortly, how mistakes can impact customer satisfaction, and then we're going to do about listening, how important it is to listen to the voice of the customer and drive some of that operational change within your business. So, service as the new marketing. We carried out this survey with Ipsos Mori in September last year. And we did it across 6 countries, the UK, where we had 2,000 respondents, USA, France, Germany, Poland, and Russia. So we really wanted to take a look across predominantly the European environment on what was driving customer satisfaction, looking at comparisons between the countries, looking country specific, seeing if some of the thoughts that we had about characteristics for certain countries were coming through, which in some instances they did. But really trying to understand, is customer service frustrating many people, and then think about what could you do better? How could you get a competitive differentiator by actually providing better service to your customers? So if we think about the British consumer, I'm afraid to say that we suffer. I don't really think that's a huge surprise to many people. We do tend to suffer. We just sort of get on and stoically carry on, and well, it will be all right. And that was sort of coming through in the survey a wee bit. We're less likely to actually read and respond to marketing than other countries. Only 19% would read and even respond to marketing. Thought it was quite interesting that we wouldn't use emotion, so we wouldn't flirt to get our own way, whereas in other countries, and if my memory serves me right, in Russia, for example, they will use whatever tactics they can to get what they want. But in the UK, we wouldn't go down that route. We're the 3rd most likely country to get angry when mistakes happen. Didn't surprise me awfully, with 61% saying they got angry about that. I was slightly surprised to see that we're higher on average to never contact an organisation. So we just carried on, and just maybe a little bit of apathy creeping in there. Not really likely to use online channels to share our experiences. It's a generational thing, and we'll look at that in more detail shortly. And probably the least forgiving with the French of companies when mistakes do get made. So that's sort of a high-level summary of what we found through the research, but let's drill into that in a little bit more detail. So if we look at the nature of the British consumer towards the end of 2012, when we asked the question around engaging with marketing and how important service was over price, what we're effectively saying is, in one of the questions, is price the only thing that really matters? And 45% of respondents disagreed with that, with only 23% saying price was more important. So actually getting a better service was more important to people than the price. If we start looking at the emotional side and what makes people angry, it's mistakes and being kept waiting unnecessarily. If you're being kept waiting 10 minutes to speak to a government agency, which we do have examples of in the survey, that's not acceptable, and people do get angry about that. And then looking at where do we play games, are we more passive than other countries? And I think we wouldn't use emotion. We would probably just bite our tongue and carry on. So looking at the ambivalence within the marketplace, what comes through when I was analysing this and comparing it with some of the other countries is I actually think we're quite apathetic as a nation. Only a quarter of consumers surveyed are totally ambivalent towards the survey they receive. And if we look at the graph, you'll see that we split this across various verticals. We've got finance, we've got phone, TV, broadband, electricity, gas, water, so your utilities, retail, so either online or in-store, and government. So we're really saying, a quarter are neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. They just sort of bumble along. But then also looking at other areas around, in the utilities, that they never contact their provider. Does that mean that people are just completely happy that their providers go and check their gas meter readings? and they don't interact, or they don't shop around to get a better deal. And 39% of consumers never check price comparison sites. Whereas, if you listen to the news and the radio, you can't go anywhere without hearing about price comparison sites. But looking at the respondents that we had on the survey, 39% are just not looking at those sites. So if we take a look at understanding customer satisfaction, and we've broken this out across the various verticals. I would say, looking at the government, including taxes, benefits, and public services, the 38% dissatisfied, 31% ambivalent. That was pretty much, they came out in those sort of figures across every country. What caught my attention, though, when we were looking at this, is on the retail side, 65% are satisfied. Well, that on the face of it sounds quite good, but if you were a restaurant and only 65% of your customers were satisfied with the service they'd received, I'm not sure how long you'd stay in business. You'd be losing quite a lot of customers still. So I think looking at this and where the customer satisfaction comes in, and the opportunity to turn the neither satisfied nor dissatisfied customers into satisfied customers would be where I would be focusing. If I'm in the finance sector and only 43% are satisfied, have I got an opportunity there to turn 31% of my ambivalent customers, who are probably in the group that may switch? There's 24% are probably in a higher percentage that would switch, but 31% there. Could I turn them into more satisfied customers and build a longer-term relationship with them? Would be an area that I would be focusing in on. So, if we look at how often British consumers actually contact different organisations, again, we've got fairly high percentages that are never contacting. 1 to 2 times, again, we're up in the 35 or between 30 to 40% mark. And then going down. But I do think it's bizarre that there are people who in the last 6 months have just never even contacted any of those sectors. Who never contacted their bank, or looked into gas and electricity, or even a retail outlet. Thought that was quite an interesting stat. But then if we start looking at wait times around, when you do contact a business, what are the wait times that customers are experiencing? Well, I know from my job and my experience of putting workforce management solutions into contact centres, the industry average goal for service level is to answer 80% of calls within 20 seconds. So my eye was immediately taken on this slide to, well, how many are hitting it within the 20-second mark? And we've said between 10 and 30 seconds. And you'll see from the slide on the left-hand side that it's actually very, very low. Whereas the majority are waiting more than 1 minute and less than 5 minutes, with the exception there being that the government sector, you typically are waiting more than 10 minutes in a lot of instances. There's a great opportunity to turn that round, because we could see from one of the earlier slides that consumers actually get 62% of consumers get quite angry about being kept waiting. And it comes down to having that visibility into when your customers are calling, or when they're writing or wanting to do email chats and the rest, and working out how many people you need and making sure you have got the right number of people to deal with those inquiries that are coming in. So how do mistakes impact customer satisfaction? Obviously, they make customers angry. We could see that 61% of customers got angry. So then from that, we start looking at, where are mistakes being made? Take a look at the finance sector. 10% are account errors. Now, if that's a bank and it's making errors in people's accounts, that is going to cause a lot of stress for the consumer. So again, it's looking at, why are you making those mistakes? Should you have more clearly defined standards and best practice in place? Because if there are errors being made, and those errors are typically, if they're paperwork mistakes, so 10% of paperwork mistakes, that quite often is happening in a back office environment. If those mistakes are getting made, that leads the customer to call through to the company, typically into the contact center. And some of the stats that we see, if 20% of calls into contact center are due to a broken process in the back office, mistakes being made in the back office, you can very quickly turn that dissatisfied customer percentage, reduce that dissatisfied customer percentage, and reduce the number of errors that are being made. Retail, we would expect to see a large percentage of ordering mistakes, but really there shouldn't be account errors at 17% for electricity, gas and water. We thought that looked quite high. If we start looking at how the consumer wants to express their dissatisfaction or share their experiences, might be a better way of putting it. In the UK, we're still going to do it in person or over the phone as the majority. What we're seeing is through generations that the younger generation are the most likely to express their dissatisfaction on Facebook or on Twitter. They will use those tools that are available to them today. And by using those tools, they can get quite vocal and quite powerful. Women are more likely to voice their concerns over Facebook than men. Maybe there's a higher percentage of women use Facebook. I can't comment on that. But certainly we're doing it in face, and we're starting to see coming through an increase of use on Facebook and of Twitter. And I would guess, and I have no proof for this, but I would say that is a percentage that will increase over the coming years. So we do need to start listening to the voice of the customer to drive out these errors and understand what is upsetting customers. So in summary, before I hand over to Steve, what we've seen through some of this research is, particularly for the younger consumer, that service is really the new marketing. Make that differentiator, listen to the customers, and that's going to give you a competitive advantage. We didn't really see any organizations really delighting their customers overall, with customers being kept waiting for too long or mistakes being made. And it's those areas of identifying where the mistakes are being made, to having that visibility, and then driving processes to provide a consistent service to your customers, I think is really important. And then finally, looking at the fact that mistakes are very damaging and can undo goodwill. So get better management across the back office environments would help that, and would reduce those dissatisfied customers needing to call in with their dissatisfaction. So, avoiding having too many dissatisfied customers. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Steve to talk a bit about why it's important and how you could listen to the voice of the customer.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. Steve Rosier from Verint. I'm Director of Analytics, and what we're going to do briefly now is touch upon voice of the customer and voice of the customer analytics, and understand, based on the findings of that survey, how we can actually focus on service and understand where those broken processes are, and also focusing on some best practice and understand where we're doing things well, and taking Claire's point there as to how can we actually surprise and delight customers. So typically across the enterprise now, we see there's a lot of the conversations that we initiate are, it's quite a small percentage, but it's around surveying, and whether that be through IVR, post-call, or email surveys. Very structured questions as to how was the service that you received today, and kind of getting a point in time and a moment in time as to how that transaction went. But the majority of the conversations that are coming into the enterprise, and typically about 85%, are things that customers initiate. Now, a lot of this is very unstructured. So it's phone calls, it's emails, it's letters, it's web chat. And again, I think a lot of organizations still struggle at the moment to understand, when we're talking a lot about big data, there's a lot of information out there, but it's how you take a lot of that unstructured data and turn it into something meaningful, and particularly into some kind of actionable insight, so that you can actually drive transformation into the organization. Underpinning all of that now, obviously with the emergence of social channels, there is a lot out there that we have very little control over, whether it be through social media or word of mouth. Obviously impacted upon the transactions that customers have with the organisation across a variety of touch points, but in a lot of areas that that is still it's kind of out there at the moment, but there's not a lot of control around it. There's not a lot of organisations that are actually doing that well. So are we really listening? I mean, some further research that we did with Ipsos Mori in 2011, we found that 44% of consumers believe that companies don't actually care what they think. Now, this was with a third believing that feedback is absolutely pointless, but with 80% of companies stating that they do have a formal process in place for capturing that. So whilst a lot of that surveying goes on, I think a lot of customers don't really see any kind of end result from that. There's not that kind of 360 feedback back into the customer to say, okay, we hear what you're saying, we're making changes, we are making progress, and this is what we're doing about it. So I think you could do all the surveys in the world, but sometimes if you've got this, as we saw in the initial research, this apathy out there where customers don't actually truly believe that the feedback that they're giving you is going to make a jot of difference, then unfortunately it becomes a bit of a moot point. Because it can all just be noise. I think this again is probably sort of fairly familiar to most people in that there's a lot of silos out there. There's a lot of information that is gathered, a lot of channels that customers are using. But again, it's very rare that you find that kind of single point of contact or that single moment of truth where all of that is collated into a unified scorecard to understand across the enterprise where are the failures, where is the best practice, what's driving customer dissatisfaction, and what's driving customer delight. And that's only getting more difficult with the advent of various different channels through social media and other touch points into the business. It's trying to take all of that and to unify it, to understand holistically what is the voice of the customer, what is driving that customer experience, and how can we best improve service on the back of that. And on top of that, I mean, it's really kind of trying to free yourself from the what. So again, we hear a lot of talk about big data, and there is a lot of information out there, but is it actionable? Is it insight that you can actually take away and start to transform your organization? So it's more taking yourself away from the what and try and focus on the why. And when we look at and we talk about voice of the customer, it is things such as this. Why are they calling? Why are they unhappy? Why are they leaving? Why are they happy? So again, trying to find that best practice within your organization. Where you're doing things well, how are you doing that? Because we tend to find with a lot of our customers that there are definitely pockets of best practice out there, but it's very hard to put your finger on and understand what that's all about. So analytics, and when we talk of voice of the customer, analytics holds the answers to a lot of those questions, because it can take that vastly unstructured data, which, as we saw earlier, that's the 85% of transaction into the enterprise, and actually start making sense of that, to categorize it, to put it into buckets and themes and trends, and understand why are customers contacting us in the first place? Why are they unhappy? Why are they happy? What's driving churn? What's driving increase in sales success and things of that nature? Because we always look at the early warning signs. I think when we talk about social media, there are a lot of customers out there at the moment that are treating it just as another channel for complaints and kind of missing the bigger picture. So we always hear when things go viral, and there's some many horror stories out there already. And I think when customers are monitoring social media, in a lot of cases it is unfortunately on the negative. It is trying to understand when things go viral, why do they go viral. But obviously there's a lot of things that sit beneath the surface of that iceberg. We saw the majority of the contacts still at the moment is calls. There's direct customer and employee feedback, there's emails, there's chat, there's a variety of different touch points within the business where that information is whether it's being solicited through feedback or whether it is completely unsolicited and unstructured through just customer interactions on a day-to-day basis. It's taking all of that and using it as an early warning rather than letting it get to the point of a complaint, whether that be in social media going viral or whether it be complaints into governing bodies. It's understanding what are the touch points leading up to that point of complaint and trying to head it off early. Because again, I think there are a lot of case studies out there and a lot of horror stories out in social media where when things go viral, typically there's between 6 to 9 months worth of customer frustration leading up to that point. A lot of these things don't happen overnight. So it's really sort of understanding all of the failures within the organisation leading to that point and getting that early warning before it actually becomes viral or it becomes an official complaint. So bringing that all together, so we talk about voice of the customer analytics, it really is putting the customer at the heart of the business. It's taking all of those touch points and those channels and feeding it into that single moment of truth or that unified scorecard to understand that on process, on technology, on agent behaviors, where are the failings within your organisation and what can you do, looking at the root cause behind that, what can you do to change that and to turn the tide, and where you're doing things well, again, how are you doing things well, and is that down to individuals, is it down to processing, training, whatever, and then tracking and trending that over time across the organisation. So looking where you're putting initiatives in place, are they actually effective, or are they effective for a short period of time and then bad habits start creeping in again? So it's really using the analytics tools available to you right now to put the customer at the heart of your business. So without really sort of going in depth into product, I mean, what we're talking about around the analytics side, I mean, on speech analytics, you have the ability to take all of that unstructured data within calls into the enterprise and categorize that and understand root cause and trends and themes. With text analytics, you can do that with emails, you can do that with web chat and live chat and things of that nature. Enterprise feedback, as I say, is more of the structured, but it is more listening to that unstructured data and showing customers that you're doing something with it. Otherwise, you do get this apathy creeping in, as say where we see 44% of customers saying it's actually pointless giving feedback because nobody does anything with it. And unifying these products and kind of putting that voice of the customer initiative in place in the organization, essentially you've already got focus groups on demand out there. So you've got customers telling you in their thousands what they think is wrong with the experience that they're receiving at the moment, what they think is wrong with the service, why they're going to competitors or why they're actually moving from competitors to your organization. And a lot of that still remains untapped to this day. So it's having the tools in place to be able to take all of that, to make sense of it, and to turn that big data into sort of big analytics and to get those themes and trends off the back of it and understand that actionable insight into what can actually transform your business. And as we've seen from the research, where service is becoming so much more important now over the price, it's rather than just going out there and asking the questions that you think you need to your customers. As I say, it's making the best and tapping into the information that they're already providing you completely unsolicited at this point in time, and then feeding it back to them so that in future you don't get this apathy and fatigue within surveying where customers actually think that there's no point in communicating with you at all. And that's obviously the biggest danger when we look at that 29% of apathetic customers. These are easy pickings for competitors just to swoop in and surprise and delight them. So that's it, very sort of high level is voice of the customer and voice of the customer analytics. And now I'll hand back over to Claire to take the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. So if we think about that we've listened to the voice of the customer and we've got that insight from our customers into what is causing them dissatisfaction or what is really working well for them, we can then start to look at within the business, how can we better streamline our processes, how can we more effectively deal with our customers to drive a better service and a better experience. So some of the areas that I focus in on is really about how we can start to achieve some operational excellence. And we break it down, trying to keep it really quite simple here, into three areas. I have people, I have processes, and I have work within my business. And that work and those people and those processes will cover the contact center, back office operations, as well as a branch network. And ultimately what I want to achieve is to obtain visibility into what is going on within my various parts of my enterprise. In the contact center, we're a very mature market, and we have a lot of visibility into that information through ACDs and understanding what's going on within the business and doing planning and scheduling. But in a back office environment, we have less, traditionally we've had less visibility. It's quite hard to see how much work, well, it has been quite hard for customers to see how much work there is. It's quite difficult to see how productive staff are and how they're applying best practice and following the right processes to complete work. So firstly, I want to gain visibility into what's going on in my business. And then I want to start generating some standards within the business. Standards or standardization so that I can really get to a stage where I've got one version of the truth across all the touch points that are with my customers. And once I understand the visibility and I have some standards in place, my focus is really going to come on improving productivity, particularly around non-contact center environments. So understanding what is productive work, what is unproductive work. Is there idle time out there? There will be some. Can we reduce that? Can we reduce the amount of non-productive work that's going on to improve productive time? Because if I'm able to do that, typically I'm able to deal with more work. And by dealing with more work and keeping the focus and ensuring my best practices are applied, I'm getting that work done and I'm getting it right first time. So if we think about how we're interacting with our customers, I've already said I have a branch environment if you're financial services, for sure. I've got the contact center, the back office, as well as marketing that will have some interaction. All of those areas are going to be dealing with customers, and in most instances, we're going to have service level objectives. So if you're going into a branch, you may say, I want to serve my customers who are walking in and see a teller within 5 minutes of them walking into the branch. Well, how many tellers do I need throughout the day to do that? When are my busiest times a day within the branch? If I have salespeople in those branches, I want them available to deal with my walk-in customers. So as a business, I'm improving my sales, but from a consumer perspective, they're getting their inquiry dealt with on the first time they walk into the branch. If I take a back office environment, my service levels are now no longer a matter of minutes, it's days, in some instances it's weeks. So how am I going to deal with all the work that's coming in and make sure I get it right and I get it back out to the customer when I've got 14 days or 21 days to deal with that piece of work and there are a load of steps in the process? So ultimately, I want to break that down. I want to understand and link the processes, but understand how many people do I need, with which skill set, and what is the process that we're following to do this work, so that it goes back to the customer in a timely fashion, and that the contact center is doing more value-add stuff than trying to deal with customers who are unhappy. So we break this down one little step further. If I look across the enterprise, and I've got my people, my processes, and all my work, and I've got my consumers or my customers, I'm now starting to break it into what is customer-facing work and what is non-customer-facing work. And it may well be that within the branch, I have a combination of both, customer and non-customer-facing work that has to get done. But ultimately, what I want is one platform to plan all of that, have that visibility, and really understand what's going on. And if I'm starting to listen to the voice of the customer, and I'm now driving my processes to get process improvement, I'm linking it all back together and I'm getting that 360 visibility. And by doing that within the business, I can drive some very high yields or efficiency gains as an enterprise. But ultimately, I'm also going to be delivering my consumers a better service. So some of the efficiency gains within the retail branch environment are 12 to 15% efficiency gain. Well, how do you do that? Well, you're planning more effectively the times they have to do non-customer facing work. I'm freeing up my salespeople to be available at the busy times. I don't want them filling out reports and doing paperwork at busy times of the day. I want them there dealing with the consumer. Looking at what my tellers are doing. How can I effectively use my tellers to make sure that they've got that time to do referrals and have a conversation with the customer, but also make sure that the teller work is done in a timely fashion. The contact center, my 15 to 25% efficiency gains, again, that is really done through getting good forecast accuracy of the work that's coming in, ensuring a good schedule adherence. If I've managed to build a schedule that fits with my employees' requirements as well as my business requirements, I want people to stick to it. I want to be sure that people are there when we've asked them to be there. They get breaks, make sure that they get their breaks in a timely fashion. Then the back office. The back office efficiency gains are huge. But what we will also see when we've looked at the difference between the size of the contact centre market and back office operations, the back office environment is 3 to 5 times as large as the contact centre. And a lot of the work has been done manually. So the opportunity to change and drive process improvement is huge within the back office. And my key focus here is looking at the productivity of my staff, understanding my backlogs. I want to reduce that to gain that visibility into what is going on within my operation and push people or guide my staff down a route of best practice whilst increasing the productivity within the business. And ultimately, what we do see when we speak to customers is when it all gets a bit hectic and the backlog increases and they know they've got a lot of work out there, they're offering overtime, and that's hugely costly to the business. So ultimately, I would be looking, where possible, to reduce overtime, because if we've got a better visibility of what's going on, we understand the service levels, we can deal with that. And overtime is a last resort, and we can get away from going down that route. And if we're dealing with work in a timely fashion, then the consumer isn't kept waiting, and we could see that 61% of consumers got angry when they were kept waiting. So again, I think it's really important to make sure that consumers are not kept waiting. And if you're seeing that information out there through listening to the voice of the customer, well, then you can go and look at what is going on in your business and drive that change. And it takes time to drive this change, but the consumer will ultimately see a difference in how they're interacting with an enterprise. And I think on that is the end of the presentation. Just one final note from me before we go out to any questions is that we have also pulled together a white paper on some of the market research that we covered this earlier on in the webinar. So if you would like to have a copy of that white paper, we can absolutely make that available to you. So over to you, John, if there are any questions.
Thanks very much, Claire. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, what we'll be doing post the live event, so those of you who are listening to us live, you'll receive a thank you email probably tomorrow morning, along with a link to the recording, so you can recap everything that you've heard today. If you're interested in any of those particular charts or illustrations, you'll be able to access those via the recording link, and we'll make sure that you have both Claire and Steve's contact details, both at the end of today's presentation, but also in that follow-up email, so that you can make contact if you wish to request that white paper. Thank you very much, Claire, and to you, Steve. Very insightful presentations as always. And now, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of questions, I've picked out some questions which I would like to sort of address to Steve and Claire. And if you've got any additional questions, if you're listening live to this broadcast, you can use the Q&A icon, which is the question mark icon on the floating toolbar, and just put in your short question, 256 characters, and press send, and that will come through, and we can address as many of those before the end of today's presentation. We've got about 20 minutes left, so first of all, I think just a general sort of question to Steve or Claire is a lot is said about service becoming the new marketing, and what do you see as being the underlying driver of this move? Is it the move towards our sort of social interactions via social media, and therefore our experiences through service more easily get broadcast out to the wider world? What do you see as the driver of the importance of service going forward? Who's best to answer that?
I can start, and then see if Claire has anything to add. I think just kind of the choice out there available at the moment, and when you're looking on price, I mean, more often than not, I mean, yes, you're looking at price comparison sites and things of that nature, and you might be able to make a bit of a saving, but ultimately, do you want the hassle of constantly changing service providers? And I think, where there is brand loyalty out there, customers would prefer just to kind of continue along that vein, providing they're not being ripped off on price, providing they're getting a good service. And when you're looking at that, the 29% of apathetic customers out there, until somebody else comes along and absolutely delights them on service, then they're probably just going to continue paying by their direct debits or whatever. So I think, with the complaints out there, because they're more vocal, it's kind of easier to understand what they don't like about your service, providing that, again, you're kind of doing that analytical piece around it and understanding what's driving that, and that should be driving change within the organisation. The fact that they actually want to communicate with you and tell you what's wrong about it is, that gives you something to work on. I think these apathetic customers are the ones that worry me, because, as I say, they are more easy pickings for competitors to come along and swoop them up. But I think a lot of it is driven by just the choice out there at the moment, and the fact that a lot of customers, if you're giving them a good service, then are they really going to be looking around for differential on price when it comes down to pennies sometimes?
And is it true? I think I've seen some recent research again from Verint, which was with regard to people are looking at service much more when it looks to making that decision, and it can even sort of move above price as the key reason for choosing a particular organisation. Is that something that is starting to sort of resonate with your clients?
I think, again, with social media and the fact that it's a lot easier now to understand who are the good players out there. So rather than just word of mouth in the past, we always sort of had the statistics where if you delight somebody, they might tell one or two of their friends, but if you upset them, then they're going to tell sort of 12 or 20. Obviously, that exponentially now through social media, that is available out there to understand where people are having good or bad experience. So the bad experience, then obviously you're going to steer clear of those customers, but where people are really advocating organisations on service, then that is a big draw to customers we're seeing.
And Claire, in terms of workforce optimization, or sort of working towards sort of gaining those efficiencies that you so clearly highlighted in your presentation, do you see that there is a sort of a direct relationship between the productivity of the various divisions within the organisation and customer satisfaction and customer experience? Do you see a linkage between the two?
I'm not sure if there's a linkage as such, but what we are seeing is that if you've got low productivity and you're missing your service levels in the back office, then you will see an increase in calls of customers chasing for information. So I gave the example of 20% of calls into the contact centre due to broken process in the back office. Well, that figure only augments when those processes are not being followed, and productivity levels are even lower than some of the average that we see today. So it's all about understanding what's going on and having that vision, really having that vision to drive up the productivity. And please don't think I'm wanting to turn back office operations into a sweatshop. I'm absolutely not. But I think there is an argument to be said that during work hours you should be getting on with work, and nobody goes to work to do a bad job. So if somebody's productivity is low, to understand why is their productivity low. As a manager, how can I coach and support members of my team to have a higher level of productivity and ensure that they're getting the work right first time. So it just comes. It's a pure coaching cycle. A lot of it, what the managers are doing is properly managing and supporting and coaching their teams. From a corporate perspective, I'm looking at it, I want to break down those silos. nothing that irritates me more is and you know, we've all had the situations where you ring into contact center, you get told, oh well, we don't deal with that, that's in a just different division. I'll ring and ask them to call you back, and then 2 days later they call you back, and it just shows how siloed that business is. And when they call you back, you're at work, and they call you at home, and then you're back into that awful cycle again. So there's nothing more irritating as a consumer when you're caught in that cycle. But actually, if you speak, and I find this, it might sound ridiculous, but actually when you speak to the staff within these businesses, they can tell you where the broken process is. They know exactly where the broken process is. And sometimes I think, you know, it might be quite useful for some of the management level people to go and spend a day working on the floor, go and work in the call center, go and work in the back office. You will very quickly see where there are broken processes within your business and how you could drive up productivity, and through that improve customer satisfaction within the organization as a whole. You get that insight, and I think in a lot of instances, and the companies are driven to being short-termist. You know, we need to give good results out to the market. I totally accept that, but actually putting a long-term customer satisfaction program in place, long-term you will get greater loyalty from your customers, and they will stick with you, and you will generate a more sustainable revenue if you start listening to the customer and you break down those silos and remove the broken processes. I get quite passionate about it, I know, but
no,
to me it is so important, and you know, the customers can be more vocal these days than they used to be able to be because of social media, and I think that will continue to be the way forward.
And Steve, you know, the research highlighted that there's quite a substantial minority of people who don't express themselves to organisations, be it positive or negative, and sort of the silent customer syndrome. And is there anything that we can do as service people within our organisations to encourage our customers to express themselves and to tell us at least, you know, sort of whether they're happy or not, so that we can do something about it if we find that they're not? Are there any tricks that organisations are using to try and overcome the apathy?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in some cases, again, you know, depending on the demographics of the customer base, I mean, sometimes it's people very cleverly using social media to kind of, you know, create communities and create those kind of focus groups and actively encourage people to give feedback on new products and services. So rather than using social media, as we saw in the presentation, as another sort of channel for complaints, is actively engaging with people, because it's so easy now with smartphones and tablets and everything to sort of be constantly in contact, providing you're making that kind of appropriate to either various different transactions or the service that you're providing. On the feedback and the surveying side of things, again, I mean, if you make sure that that is dynamically linked into transactions that they might have with the organisation, plus you've created a culture where you can show customers that, you know, we do take that on board, we are doing something with that feedback, so you don't come across this sort of surveying fatigue, then again, I think people are going to be more open to give that feedback. But I think at the moment it does go back to that, you know, the 44% of people saying, well, it's pointless giving any kind of feedback because nobody ever does anything with it.
And in terms of those silos around different channels or across different divisions, when an organisation implements something like Voice of the Customer Analytics, does that force them to sort of centralise the ownership and control of customer interaction across the channels? Because in order to be able to get anything sensible out of the analytics solution, you need to be able to sort of gather it into one place and somebody have ownership over what you do with the insight that you've got. Does it help overcome that sort of siloed mentality?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see more of that now with sort of customer experience executives and voice of the customer sort of roles within the organisation. I think it does help to have that champion within the organisation, because otherwise, again, it is going to be very siloed. Now, that's not to say that you need a vast team sort of sitting beneath that. I think you can pull in again, sort of analysis and insight from all over the organisation, all over the enterprise, from various different subject matter experts, but to have that kind of key focal point that does actually take some kind of ownership with what are you going to do with all of this insight when you gather it. We are starting to see with a lot of our customers now that those kind of roles are coming more to the forefront.
And do you find that that owner has to have some teeth to their role? It's not just sort of a figurehead role. And do you need that sort of buy-in right at the top into the sort of the use of the outcomes of voice of the customer analytics? Because sort of in a scenario where, let's say, voice of the customer analytics identifies that there is an issue in billing, then the person who's the customer experience owner needs to have the authority to go to billing and get that change done to stop that bad experience happening. Is there are these customer experience owners, have they got the teeth necessary to make these sort of changes?
Yeah, I mean they need to. Otherwise, as you say, it's just a figurehead. So, and I think where we've seen a lot of change being driven out of the contact centre, where people are realising that actually this is certainly at the moment with a lot of the interactions from customers coming via sort of the voice channel still fairly traditionally, but the contact centre can be taken from, rather than looking at it as a cost centre, to it's getting all of this unsolicited feedback. If you can actually do something tangible with that, it's going to really help to sort of drive that transformational change within the organisation. So I think certainly there is a change in perception within. Certainly we're seeing within the contact centre now, and some of these roles I think are being driven out of, whether it be a combination of a marketing role and a contact centre role. But yeah, absolutely, it needs to have some teeth within the organisation, otherwise you're just paying lip service to it.
And yeah, in terms of looking sort of forward into sort of the next 12 months or so, there are competitive sectors that I assume can get some sort of easy wins out of the returns they get from both workforce optimization and voice of the customer. What sectors are you seeing are particularly sort of gaining early benefits from investments in this area?
I would start with the workforce optimization side. I think sectors, particularly breaking down silos as financial services, that's where we're seeing some strong interaction and sort of some strong gains being made, as well as BPO, so the outsourcing sector. Moving forward, we would anticipate insurance services to be an area that we'll also start to get some good case study material and focus coming through on, because they've all got large contact centre markets to start with, as well as quite chunky back office operations behind that. Certainly the financial services sector with complaints handling, it's a market that is really trying to improve. Nobody wants to be on the which list or the FSA list as number one as being worse for complaints handling. It's a number one tag mark that you really don't want against your organisation. So there's a lot of focus there, but it's also, particularly financial services, you're not just looking at contact centre and the back office, you can also bring the branch network in and really start to utilise the resources that you have as a larger pool and get economies of scale through doing so. So, for example, we see our customers talking about using what they refer to as stranded capacity. Well, is there times of day in the branch where it's very quiet? Could they take some call centre inquiries to help us out, so that we're more able to hit our service levels in a consistent fashion? So it's really coming to driving down those silos and having that vision within your business for standardisation and simplification.
And I guess from my side on the analytics, I mean, it cuts across all sectors and all verticals. I mean, we see a lot around compliance and risk aversion within, obviously, the financial sector. But there are things that are quite sort of generic drivers across all sectors, really, whether it be looking at, increasing sales conversion, whether it be looking at driving out avoidable contact or driving up the customer experience. I think what we find with using the analytics tools that we have available today is that it's not just focusing on the known or trying to quantify the known issues that you have within your organization. It's using them to intuitively tell you what are the next big things, and again getting the early warning to what some of the next big issues might be and telling you what the unknown is. And I think that's really where it's sort of starting to come into its own.
And sort of building on that, do you often find that customers are adopting, let's say voice of the customer analytics based on probably some of those known things that you referred to, because you have to build an ROI case around something tangible, sort of which you know about. But then once they implement it, they actually find that there are a whole load of savings and insights which they didn't expect to find, which actually is the sort of the cream on the cake, as it were.
Absolutely, and that's where a lot of the kind of the wow factor is on things that they had absolutely no idea within the organisation that these things were taking place. But even on the known, I think sometimes it's just being able to quantify that and to be able to prioritise what your initiatives are going forward, because a lot of that is kind of based on assumption and hearsay at the moment. But once you can actually put some real solid numbers around those known issues, then oftentimes your priorities shift as to what your initiatives within the organisation should actually be.
And I suppose it helps from if you are looking to fix those broken processes wherever they are in the be it front office or back office, or if you're looking at things which trigger poor customer experiences, the analytics piece provides that proof that perhaps they didn't have internally before, to actually go to particular departments and say, look, listen to this. This is actually what is happening. It's not just our opinion. This is hard fact. Is that sort of hard evidence? Is that something which sort of helps drive change sort of quicker within organisations?
It really does. I mean, and oftentimes we've found that where in the past it's been, anecdotal or 5-bar gates that have been driven by the agents to say, well, this process is broken or the system isn't working the way it should be. Once you can actually size that through using the analytics piece, oftentimes you find things that have kind of been known within your organisation for months, sometimes years, suddenly becoming a priority that needs to be changed within the next few weeks.
Great stuff. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got any further questions for Steve or Claire, and you want to direct those to them personally, then you can do so by contacting them by email. You'll see on the screen, and we've got Steve and Claire's email addresses again. I'll be forwarding these with the follow-up email post this live event. If you're listening to the rebroadcast of the recording, then you can actually pause this, obviously, and jot those down. And Steve and Claire will be very, very happy to take questions on any of the subjects that we have covered today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our 1-hour webinar, so it's just for me to thank you, first of all, our presenters today very much for their time, coming and sharing their insights into the way that service is becoming a much more important player in the public face of the organisation, and is indeed becoming the new marketing and the new brand hero. So thanks very much to Steve Rosier and to Claire Richardson. Thank you very much to Verint for their kind support both of this webinar and our ongoing Directors Club activities. They've been one of our cornerstone supporters since we founded the Directors Club in 2010. And if you're interested in what we're up to and future events that we're holding, then you can go to our website, which is dcgbni.co.uk, and if you click on the events icon on the navigation bar, you can see what events are coming up. If you wish to follow us on Twitter, we've got a great Twitter feed, and it's actually an ongoing feed of all the latest articles and research that we've found on the internet, which we think are useful for customer-facing, customer-focused professionals. So if you follow us on Twitter at DCGBNI, then you get that every day. That's updated every day, 5 days a week. Now, if you want to find out more about voice of the customer analytics and workforce optimization, you can go to verint.com, and there's plenty of information there, or, of course, as I said earlier, you can contact both Steve and Claire directly. So it's just coming up to the top of the hour, so thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for spending your lunchtime or if you're listening to the recording, spending your hour listening to our presentation today. We have plenty more webinars coming up in the near future, and hopefully I will have your company again in not too distant future. So thank you again, and look forward to being with you again very soon. Thank you. Bye.